lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm going to be talking to you about medical memoirs. So this is a start of a new series on my channel where I basically give you some recommendations, talk about a few books that I wouldn't personally recommend about a particular topic, and also give you my general TBR of things that are on my radar for the future, all around a specific style of book. We're going to loosely call this at the moment either the good, the bad and the perspective, or rec, reject, prospect. Haven't decided yet, we'll put it in the thing below. Let me know what you think in the comments or if you have any better ideas. So like I said, today we're talking medical memoirs, and by that I mean we're going to be talking about books that are non-fiction and people's personal experiences working in the medical field, whether it be with living patients such as doctors or with their dead bodies afterwards such as a mortician or a forensic pathologist or something like that. So let's talk about the ones that I totally would recommend first. The first one of these is The Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Stories from the Crematorium by Doughty. This is the book that really started it all for me in terms of my enjoyment of reading things that are very medical and kind of scientifically based, specifically about the human body. Doughty is a mortician. She has a YouTube channel called Ask the Mortician, and this is her memoir of her early days in her career, finishing her training and working in the first crematorium where she was based, and some of her experiences and the people that she met along the way. She has gone on to write other things since, and she's a fantastic author who has a great back catalogue, so totally check her out. But this is her first book and is the most kind of memoir of all of them, and I would heavily recommend it. She brings such levity to what is quite an intense topic at times, and is a really interesting look at how Western culture interacts with the concept of death, especially American culture and how it interacts with death. The next one I want to talk about is This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. I feel like everybody has kind of read this book and heard about it, but it deserves all the hype that it gets. Adam Kay used to be a doctor working in the NHS. He was in the gynecology and babies department. I can't remember the official term for that, but he has since left the medical profession basically due to stress, and this is his diary. These are his diaries from his time there, but then he has footnotes kind of being able to reflect back on this, so you get a lovely mixture of the immediacy of the emotions of the experiences he was going through and his frustrations and elations dependent on the sort of scene, but then also that distance for him to be able to look critically at what was happening, and that general discussion of the NHS and sort of the state that it's in overall. Adam Kay is hilarious. I think that his particular brand of humour really appeals to me, but it is touching and emotional in so many places and left me actually in tears. It's incredible. Looping back to dead bodies, we have Working Stiff by Judy Melnick. This is the kind of 2 years specifically where she was a medical examiner in New York, and it's about the various cases that she took on. It is heavily technical and you don't get much resolution of the cases because it's about what kind of comes across her desk and then leaves, and you don't always get to know the answers, which is fair enough because she doesn't always get to know the answers. And towards the end of the book it does focus on her time in New York after 9/11 and being involved in some of the body identification on the kind of ground zero, so just be aware of that going in. That sort of came out of nowhere for me and I wasn't fully emotionally prepared for that. But her writing is really interesting from a very scientific point of view, and she just generally has a really lovely writing style, so I would totally recommend this one. I actually blitzed it in a day. It is really good. Okay, now time to talk about a couple that I would sort of just like generally recommend. They weren't necessarily my favourites. The first of these is Brain on Fire by Susannah Callahan, I believe. This is actually from the experience of a patient. It is her experience going through having basically an undiagnosed neurological disorder that was causing all sorts of kind of chaos in her life. It was having a huge range of very varying and very alarming symptoms, and it was her experience working with medical professionals to try and work out what was happening to her, and that discussion of what it was like to be trapped in a body that she could no longer kind of control, and to have people who just didn't really believe when she was saying that what they were saying wasn't accurate. Susan Callahan was a journalist before her disorder developed, and it was, you could kind of see that through her writing. So it was a good, strong book, but I do think it's almost like a long form article than a full, well-rounded book in itself. But I did find it really interesting, and it's the only one on this list that's actually from the point of view of exclusively a patient, and that's something which I might need to fill that gap in my sort of reading as such. She has gone on to write more stuff more to do with the history of medicine, and specifically the history of sort of how we view mental health, and I do want to check out some of her other work as well. So one that I still would recommend, but not a favourite like the others. A similar kind of reaction to one is Do No Harm, which is by Henry Marsh, and this is stories of life, death and brain surgery. So Henry Marsh is a very well respected brain surgeon. He has many years in the field, and this is his memoir coming towards the end of his career, so you do get that sort of slightly navel gazing stare back at his sort of life's work. The bits that were about neuroscience and like brain surgery was really cool, but I do think him as a kind of narrative voice, there were a few bits where he came across as quite pompous, and he has a very like lack of understanding somewhat of kind of how the times have moved on, and his sort of his stance on the NHS and how it used to be in the good old days was very interesting, to say the least. But the brain surgery side of things is very interesting, and I definitely think if you are interested in medical memoirs in general, there is enough of the science that really carries us through, so it was still a good read. There were just a few points where his voice would come through a little bit hard, and I'd be like, I don't actually like you, but what you've done is very cool. One that's a little bit shorter, and I think suffers because of that, is Critical by Matt Morgan, I believe. This is about a guy who works in an IC unit, so he's really on the front lines of dealing with the most intense of cases, being in an intensive care unit. And again, I feel like it's sort of trying to riff off of some of the stuff that Adam Kay has laid the foundations for with the success of This Is Going to Hurt, where it's kind of jumping on talking about his experiences, but he doesn't really flesh out any of the patients enough to feel like you kind of make a real strong connection with them. And again, he can get very navel gazy about like, what is the purpose of life, which is so easy to slip into when you're talking about life and death situations that you find in medicine, and I just found his voice a little bit irritating. However, again, the science and talking about the different ways that the human body can fail in that intensive setting, and sort of the real extreme cases that come across his way, and the role of the IC unit is absolutely fascinating, especially in the wake of the pandemic, with IC units being far more of a buzzword in the news as something which people who suffer extremely from COVID end up on. And so that was very enlightening and engaging to read about, given that it's a lot more prevalent recently. So those are the books that I would personally recommend. Now let's talk about one book that I would definitely not recommend, and if it's on your TBR, I would personally suggest you take it off the list. And that is The Prison Doctor by Amanda Brown. Now, I don't like to badmouth a book normally, because generally I think that there is something, there's like each book there is a reader out there for them, but this one I just feel like doesn't deliver what it says it's doing, or what it claims to be doing. So as the title suggests, Amanda Brown is a prison doctor. She's worked in a variety of different prisons, but it's really more just kind of general musings of her day-to-day schedule. You don't get really a deep dive into any of her patients. You also don't really get a deep dive into any of the treatments or the kind of general problems that come her way. There's no real discussion of the science behind what she's doing, nor any real kind of emotional connection to anything. It's just a very sort of humdrum, almost schedule style discussion of her life in general and her career, and I just don't feel like this book really serves any particular purpose. For me, the point to a medical memoir is to increase my understanding of the human body and medicine in general, and to get a glimpse behind a sort of a scene that, like, into a world that I don't know anything about. And I do quite like it when they have some kind of discussion of, like, as an industry, how does this work, and is it doing a good or a bad job? And I feel like with something like prison health, there are lots of discussions to be had about how do we provide adequate healthcare. There's all sorts of conversations about drug users and trying to tamper off when they're sort of almost going cold turkey in the cells, and sort of how that works. There's a general kind of conversation about incarceration as a whole that could be had here, and Amanda Brown takes a real surface level approach to everything that she's doing. So for me, it was a very quick and easy read, because it just really isn't doing anything at all, and I would not personally recommend it. So now that we've talked about the books that I have read, let's move on to the books that I haven't got around to yet. 2 of which I actually are on my shelves already, and then there's a further 6 that are on my want to read general list that I haven't quite got to yet. So one I picked up recently is Traces by Patricia Wiltshire. This is from a leading forensic scientist and criminal investigator. So again, we're talking similar-ish to Working Stiff, but going down a little bit more of a kind of pathology, investigative kind of style. Obviously, I've not read it yet, so I'm quite intrigued by this one, and it is based in the UK. So I think that this is going to be yeah, generally quite interesting. It's about where, apparently according to the back, it's about where nature and crime intertwine, and she quite often is dealing with bodies who have been left in very rural settings, and it's about how she finds information on their body about their crime. So I think that that is going to be a good read once I eventually get to it. This is one that it turns out Andy actually owned, and I've kind of had on my radar for a while, and I totally didn't realise that he had a copy. So this is where the combining of our book collections has been really, really helpful, and that is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. This is about basically death and healthcare and what it is like kind of with our society at the moment, with the increase in sort of longevity of lifespans and with people aging, and sort of what kind of pressures that is putting on the healthcare, and his personal experiences with it. And it's about him crossing the globe to find different experiences of mortality. It sounds somewhat similar to Caitlin Doughty's From Here to Eternity, which is about crossing the globe to find out people's different interactions with death and death rituals, but presumably this one is looking more at old age as a concept and how people who are of an older age are treated in society. So I do think this is going to be really interesting. I know Atul Gawande is a very big name in the medical memoir sort of world and has a few other books that look quite interesting, so I definitely would like to get to them quite soon. Okay, now let's talk about some of the other ones that I don't have a physical copy of yet. A huge name one that everybody always recommends, and I definitely do want to get to soon, is When Breath Becomes Air by Kalanthi. I can't read my own handwriting anymore, I'm so sorry. This is about a neurosurgeon who it turns out actually develops lung cancer, and it's about his experience going from being doctor to patient and what it is like to kind of cross that divide and to be on both sides of that coin. So it's about his neurosurgery days as well, but then what it is kind of like to be somebody with cancer. So that sounds like it's going to be really interesting, and I've heard that it is incredibly moving and is, again, like, as well as sort of Adam Kay's This Is Gonna Hurt, this is the book that people mention when they talk about medical memoirs, so I would love to get to it soon. Focusing on diagnostics and medical mysteries, I'd really like to read Every Patient Tells a Story by Lisa Sanders. This one apparently is sort of a real life House kind of situation, which I've not watched House religiously or like all the way from the beginning, but I do like to jump in with the odd episode. I find the actual like overarching plots dramatically less interesting on House, but the individual cases are quite cool, and diagnostics as a tool is incredible and an area that we've made so many advances in. More on in modern day, so that would be very, very interesting. Talking again more on the side of like forensic pathologist-y kind of thing, I've got All That Remains by Sue Black, who's actually a forensic anthropologist, so I'm assuming this will be not dissimilar to the TV show Bones, of which I have read one of the crime books which they are based off of, which is by Kathy Reichs, and I deeply did not enjoy it, so I'm hoping that a real life actual memoir will be a better kind of reading experience for me. Talking about sort of the state of the NHS and being a doctor and the stress of being a doctor overall, is Breaking and Mending by Joanna Cannon, sorry. So this is about a woman who actually suffered severe burnout as a doctor and ended up, I think, potentially even in A&E because of it. So again, we're kind of looking at that crossing over from doctor to patient kind of vibe, and again is looking more at mental health, which is something which I would like to read more about as well. Talking about forensic pathology, again we've got Unnatural Causes by Richard Shepard. This is just kind of a fairly classic book about forensic pathologists, so that sounds really interesting. And then again, another one that gets mentioned quite a lot, which I'd really like to read, is War Doctor by David Nott. And David Nott has actually made an entire career about working in conflict zones. He spent 25 years working across the world in various different areas that are in conflict, and apparently, again, it is heart-wrenching, harrowing, and incredible in equal measure. So those are a whole bunch of books that at some point in life I will get to, but who knows when. So do let me know if you like this series and if you have a particular sort of subgenre that you'd like me to talk about. I totally could do this one for dinosaurs. Easily, just saying. We're veering very close to being able to do an 8 that great, but I thought this was a good opportunity to not only talk about books that I do like, but also to kind of potentially warn you off books that I don't personally rate and I don't think are worth the time, and also to generally talk about the exciting things that are out there, because the danger with these styles of like recommendations videos is there's always just one more book that I want to read before I do the video, just in case I want to include it in the recommendations. So this kind of fixes that problem for me quite nicely, because it gives me a chance to talk talk about my TBR and let you guys know, like, hey, I am aware of these books, I would like to get to them soon, but of the ones I've read, this is what I would recommend. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think to this overall. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.